Imagine trying to build a city unlike anything humans have ever built. Not across a conventional skyline, but in a straight line through the Saudi desert. The promoted concept stretched approximately 170 kilometers, rising roughly 500 meters, while remaining only about 200 meters wide. Then came the financial scale. Reuters reported that a consultant familiar with the project estimated the line could cost more than $1 trillion. That was not money already spent, and it was not an official final budget. It was an estimate of what the vision might require. For years the question was, can Saudi Arabia build it? In 2026, the question changed. Should it still build it according to the original plan? In April 2026, Yasir Al-Rumayyan, governor of Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, publicly clarified the new position. He said no NEOM projects had been cancelled. But he also said the line by 2030 was not a must. That distinction changes the story. The line remains part of NEOM's long-term vision. Yet the original timetable is no longer sacred. Saudi Arabia is not describing the project as dead. It is reassessing sequence, spending, and priority. And that may be more revealing than cancellation. Every ambitious project eventually meets the same three forces: money, time, and reality. The line may be one of the largest modern examples of what happens when those forces collide. This is FAULTLINE, the decisions behind the world's biggest companies, technologies, and projects. To understand why the line changed, you first have to understand why NEOM existed at all. Saudi Arabia's economy was built largely around petroleum. Vision 2030 is an attempt to broaden that economic base through tourism, technology, logistics, entertainment, manufacturing, and other industries. NEOM became one of the largest physical expressions of that strategy, an enormous development region in northwest Saudi Arabia intended to attract investment, talent, and new economic activity. The line became its most recognizable idea. It promised more than real estate. It was presented as proof that Saudi Arabia could build a different economic future. That political and strategic importance helps explain why the project became so ambitious. It also explains why changing it is not a simple construction decision. The promoted vision was extraordinary. Instead of allowing a city to spread outward through conventional suburbs and roads, the line would compress urban life into an extremely narrow footprint. Homes, work, education, healthcare, entertainment, public space and transport would be organized through a linear urban structure. NEOM framed the idea around livability, sustainability, and innovation. Its mirrored exterior, dramatic height and desert setting made it instantly recognizable. But those images also concealed the most important difference between a concept and a project. A concept needs to be coherent. A project needs thousands of separate systems to work together, in the correct order, at physical scale, under real financial constraints. Renderings show the destination. They do not show the dependencies. Consider what has to work together across a project of this size. Foundations. Steel. Concrete. Energy. Water. Waste. Transport. Digital infrastructure. Emergency services. Climate control. Housing. Schools. Hospitals. Commercial space. Contractors, regulators and suppliers. Each system depends on decisions made somewhere else. A design revision can move structural requirements. A structural change can alter procurement. Procurement delays can affect contractors. Contractor delays can change the sequence of everything that follows. At ordinary scale, a mistaken assumption is expensive. Across a proposed 170 kilometers, that assumption can be repeated until it becomes enormous. This is the first FAULTLINE principle: scale does not merely multiply opportunity. It multiplies mistakes, interfaces, and uncertainty. The early number that captured global attention was approximately $500 billion. But that figure referred to the broader NEOM concept. It was not a record of money spent on the line. As planning advanced, the reported economics changed. In November 2024, Reuters reported that a consultant familiar with the project estimated the line itself could cost more than $1 trillion. Again, that was an attributed estimate, not a verified final bill. But estimates matter because they change decisions long before the final invoice exists. At $1 trillion, the question is no longer simply whether the engineering is possible. It becomes a question of priority: what else could that capital build, accelerate, or protect? PIF is not a single project investment vehicle. At the time of Reuters' April 2026 report, it was described as a fund managing roughly $925 billion. Its responsibilities span industries and national priorities. Artificial intelligence, manufacturing, tourism, infrastructure, technology and other domestic economic ecosystems all compete for attention and capital. That means the line does not need to become technically impossible to become less attractive in the near term. Another use of capital only needs to become more valuable, more urgent, or more achievable. This is the second fault line principle: the real competitor to a megaproject is not always another megaproject. It is every alternative investment that can produce a clearer return on the same resources. By late 2024, the signs of reprioritization were becoming clearer. Reuters reported that near-term work was concentrating on roughly 2.4 kilometers, including infrastructure associated with a planned World Cup stadium. The visual contrast is difficult to overstate. Place 2.4 kilometers beside the promoted 170-kilometer concept, and the active segment appears tiny. But that does not mean the rest vanished from the long-term vision. It means execution changed. Projects do not always fail by stopping. They change scope, schedule, sequence, and definition. The destination can remain on a presentation while the practical route becomes completely different. What matters is whether the smaller phase proves a viable city, or merely preserves the symbol of the larger idea. Then 2026 made the strategic change explicit. In January, the Financial Times reported that Saudi Arabia was considering a substantially smaller redesign of the line, making greater use of infrastructure already built and reconsidering how the wider NEOM region could support industrial activity. In April came the decisive public statement. Al-Rumayyan said the line by 2030 was not a must. That may sound like an admission of weakness. It can also be interpreted as an overdue act of governance. One of the most dangerous ideas in project management is that changing the plan automatically means failure. Sometimes refusing to change the plan is what converts difficulty into failure. The question is whether leadership changes course early enough to preserve value. Deadlines begin as coordination tools. They tell teams what must happen and when. But a public deadline can become something else. The target becomes a promise. The promise becomes political. The political commitment becomes difficult to question. Eventually teams stop asking, what is the right outcome? They start asking, how do we hit the announced date? That change can distort decisions throughout a project. Risk is deferred. Testing is compressed. Assumptions survive because challenging them threatens the schedule. A deadline that was meant to measure progress begins creating risk of its own. The line is not the only NEOM development that illustrates this problem. Sindalah, a luxury island development inside NEOM, held a high-profile launch in 2024. But normal public operation did not follow as expected. In June 2026, Reuters reported that Red Sea Global would take over the troubled development and assess what was required to bring it to life. Red Sea Global Chief Executive John Pagano pointed to unrealistic delivery timelines as a central problem. The lesson is not that every delay proves incompetence. It is that schedule pressure can conceal whether the underlying system is ready. A launch event can satisfy a date without producing a functioning destination. Progress should be measured by operational outcomes, not merely ceremonies, renderings, or milestones checked off on a calendar. Now imagine being responsible for the line. Years of planning have already happened. Contracts have been signed. Infrastructure has been built. Excavation has begun. Thousands of people have worked on the vision, and leaders have shown the world what the future is supposed to look like. Changing direction becomes psychologically difficult because every revision appears to question what came before. But money already spent cannot determine whether the next dollar is worth spending. That is the sunk cost problem. The correct question is not, how much have we invested? It is, given what we know today, what should we do next? Reprioritization becomes rational when new evidence changes the expected value of continuing on the original path. This is where precision matters most. NEOM still presents the line as a core component of its long-term vision. Its current official language describes a multi-phase development advancing through a phased, demand-led approach. Al-Rumayyan explicitly denied that NEOM projects have been cancelled. So this documentary is not evidence that the dream is dead. It is evidence that the dream has encountered execution. The final development may be smaller, slower, differently sequenced or built for a different mix of uses. Those changes may disappoint people who interpreted the original images as a fixed promise. But they may also be necessary if the broader objective is economic transformation rather than preservation of one architectural concept. Every major project begins with assumptions. Cost. Schedule. Technology. Demand. Financing. Regulation. Customer behavior. Conditions years into the future. But assumptions expire. When reality changes, leadership has two options: protect the original plan or protect the original objective. They are not the same thing. Saudi Arabia's stated objective is economic diversification. The line is one proposed method of advancing that objective. Once leaders separate the method from the mission, changing the project becomes possible. This is the most important lesson for businesses watching from outside Saudi Arabia. Strategy is not loyalty to a slide deck. Strategy is the discipline to keep reallocating resources toward the best available path to the objective. The line may still produce important infrastructure, new districts and technologies. It may eventually look very different from the images that first shocked the world. And perhaps that is the real story. Not whether the original dream succeeded or failed, but whether leadership can transform an enormous vision before the vision becomes an enormous liability. Human beings have repeatedly completed projects that once sounded impossible. Ambition is not the mistake. The mistake is treating correction as betrayal. Because sometimes the most important decision in a billion-dollar project is not deciding to start. It is deciding what still makes sense to finish. This is FAULTLINE, the decisions behind the world's biggest companies, technologies and projects. Subscribe for evidence before exaggeration, and the warning signs before outcomes change.